Hello and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. Let's begin with keywords that made headlines this week. President Lee Jae-myung issued a special address on the first anniversary of former President Yoon Suk-yeol's short-lived martial law declaration, highlighting the public's effort to safeguard democracy and signaling a renewed push for national unity. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung says the most significant outcome of his recent summits with U.S. President Donald Trump was Washington's approval for Seoul to develop nuclear power submarines, a move he says strengthens South Korea's strategic autonomy. South Korea's economy posted its strongest quarterly growth in nearly 4 years, with third quarter GDP rising 1.3%, a sharp upward revision driven by solid domestic demand and exports. To mark the first anniversary of former President Yoon Suk-yeol's short-lived martial law declaration, President Lee Jae-myung proposed designating it as a special holiday, praising the public's resilience. Our senior presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Exactly 1 year after the martial law declaration, President Lee Jae-myung praised the Korean people's peaceful efforts to block military rule while condemning the incident itself, calling both the attempted coup and the civic resistance unprecedented in a 21st century democracy.
역설적이게도 지난 12.3 쿠데타는 우리 국민들의 높은 주권의식과 대한민국 민주주의의 놀라운 회복력을 세계 만방에 알린 계기가 됐습니다.
President Lee on Wednesday issued a special statement, first anniversary of the Revolution of Light. He proposed designating December 3rd as the Day of People's Sovereignty and making it an official public holiday, expressing gratitude to citizens who stood unarmed against martial law forces and tanks on the night martial law was declared. He added that the Korean people fully deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for their actions.
온 세계에 민주주의의 위대함을 알린 공로로 노벨 평화상을 받는다면 갈등과 분열로 흔들리는 모든 국가들에게 크나큰 전환점이 될 것입니다.
With investigations and trials still underway, Lee reiterated his pledge to ensure that those involved are held accountable, saying they must be judged for attempting to undermine the constitutional order out of private greed and even plotting a war with a foreign entity.
다시는 쿠데타를 꿈조차 꿀 수 없는 나라, 누구도 국민 주권의 빛을 위협할 수 없는 나라를 만들기 위해서라도 정의로운 통합은 필수입니다.
When it comes to establishing a special tribunal to handle insurrection charges, now under discussion at the National Assembly, Lee said he believes lawmakers will make a wise decision. He gave a similar response when questioned about a possible extension of the special counsel probe. The message of democracy and the rule of law carried into a luncheon later in the day, as the president invited 5 key figures, including the National Assembly Speaker and the Supreme Court Chief Justice, to the presidential office. Yoon Jung-min, ArirangNews.
A massive nighttime rally was held outside the National Assembly, bringing an end to a full day of remembrance events that included music and exhibition to reflect on the martial law declaration that shook the nation just 1 year ago. Our political correspondent Moon Hye-ryun files this report.
A large rally outside the National Assembly on Wednesday night marked the climax of a full day of commemorative events held to observe the first anniversary of former President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law declaration. People filled the streets despite below-freezing temperatures, with music, speeches, and banners recalling last year's nationwide protests, setting a charged, energetic tone.
It feels like time has flown by. Some issues have been resolved, while others remain, but as a citizen, I will continue to work hard to address even those that haven't been resolved.
Lawmakers from the ruling Democratic Party and members of other liberal parties also joined the rally, standing with the public as they reflected on the events of a year ago. The nighttime rally capped a day of programs and exhibitions held throughout the National Assembly compound. Beginning in the morning, visitors were invited to view a photo exhibition documenting scenes from the hours when martial law was in effect. The collection includes images of military vehicles, civic resistance, and the historic plenary session in which all 190 lawmakers present voted unanimously to demand the lifting of martial law, a moment many consider a turning point in the crisis. A series of guided dark tours also launched on Wednesday, offering the public a first-hand look at key locations tied to the events of last year. National Assembly Speaker Won-sik led the inaugural tour himself on the first day, walking participants through the fence he climbed to enter the building, the second-floor entrance where lawmakers confronted martial law troops, and the grounds where military helicopters landed. Special displays now mark each site, and the tours will continue through Friday. The anniversary program continued late into the evening with a media facade projection on the outer walls of the assembly, recounting the timeline of the crisis and its aftermath. Combining videos shot from a year ago with performances and music to commemorate the occasion, the 20-minute show offered a reflection on the events that took place a year before and all that followed, drawing crowds well into the night.
Standing here 1 year on, the National Assembly now serves both as a memorial space and as a reminder of how decisively the public and lawmakers acted in a moment of crisis. 문혜련, ArirangNews.
In the months following the night martial law was declared, Korea's diplomatic capacity was constrained due to uncertainty over Yoon's impeachment. However, the past year has shown Korea's democratic and diplomatic resilience, according to one international observer. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
A year after the martial law crisis unsettled South Koreans and foreign observers, the country's diplomatic standing has been restored by democratic resilience and top-level diplomacy. That's according to former EU ambassador to South Korea, Michael Reiterer, who was in Seoul on the night the December 3rd decree was declared. He recalls the disbelief that swept through diplomatic circles as events unfolded.
I think I shared probably at the beginning the feeling with the international community that cannot be. This is not true. That was also the reaction of some Koreans around me at that evening.
Initial shock quickly evolved into deeper evaluation of what the crisis revealed. He cited warning signs within the previous administration and long-standing vulnerabilities in Korea's political architecture.
If you look at this night, probably without civil society and with parliamentarians jumping over the fence and military not really engaging, the whole thing could have turned completely different. So how is it possible that this declaration could have happened?
Korea's democratic resilience, he noted, has long rested on the strength of its civic mobilization, which he observed over 2 presidential impeachment crises.
Well, I think the Korean history is actually a very strong argument because the engagement of civil society in Korea is probably stronger than in other countries. I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes. 2017, I have seen it last year when I was in Korea and when I saw demonstrations against President Yoon at the time. So I think the pressure from the street is a corrective.
But he warned that relying on the public alone to prevent such crises is insufficient. Reiterer pointed to renewed discussions on constitutional reform to prevent a deadlock between the president and the executive.
And I think the lesson to be learned is that there should be something done about the presidential term, and perhaps also to make sure that the parliament and the president somehow are elected in parallel. Because one of the reasons for this coup efforts were the frustration that the president was blocked by the parliament.
Still, he noted that the world now sees Korea as having passed a significant stress test. At a time when Seoul is seeking a greater role in global affairs, from supply chain resilience to outreach to the global south, its swift return to high-level diplomacy after the crisis helped restore confidence abroad.
The international community, I think, has accepted now that Korea is back and back on track. We have seen that President Lee could host the APEC summit. He traveled to the United States. He stopped over in Tokyo. I think there is now a sound basis. And you also have a foreign minister now, Cho Yoon, who has a long experience as a diplomat. And I think he can certainly make sure that the ship remains on course, even if there are some waves on the ocean.
With Korea seeking greater influence from G7 level engagement to semiconductor supply chain leadership, Reuters stresses that foreign policy cannot be separated from internal cohesion.
The country has to unite and stay together because there are big challenges to meet. And if foreign policy starts at home, then you have to be consolidated at home. And I think, therefore, Korea would have an interest to have a more cooperative domestic environment in order to be stronger internationally.
1 year on, Korea's partners believe the country's democratic foundations remain intact, but its foreign policy role will grow only as steadily as the institutions that support it. Oh Soo-young, ArirangNews.
This week on Wednesday marked a year since former President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law in the evening of December 3rd, 2024. With the National Assembly being at the heart of the martial law declaration fiasco last year, we have our political correspondent An Sung-jin here with us to walk us through. Sung-jin, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Doyeon.
Now, you spoke with someone that was there a year ago on December 3rd of 2024. What were some notable things?
Indeed, Doyeon. Now, the witness I met, Kim Sun-young, walked us through his account of that day. Now, to begin with, Kim is a labor union member, and for him, December 3rd, 2024 was just another day, nothing different for him. He recalled the end of his day as he wrapped it up around 10 p.m. and was ready to head to sleep when his colleague told him martial law had been declared. Now, in disbelief, Kim was one of the first to witness the initial entry of martial law troops and the clash between the crowd gathered in front of the National Assembly and the police. Now have a listen to how he explains that day.
When we hold a sit-in here, except for weekends, we basically live here, eating and sleeping in a tent, as we continue our protest. To be honest, I'm human too. I was scared and terrified. But as I sat there thinking, I realized this wasn't a moment to run. This was a moment to step out.
From students and teachers to war veterans, Kim said he met all kinds of people among those who came to protest the martial law declaration. He set up speakers so they could give speeches and make announcements. Though he now no longer remains outside the National Assembly, the day still weighs heavily on his mind.
Back then, everything felt overwhelming, but the year passed so quickly. After watching everything for a year, it's just how incredible the Korean people are.
So Sung-jin, give us a recap of what happened that day. Now, on December 3rd, 2024, what actually went down?
Right, so to give you a recap of what happened on December 3rd at the National Assembly, former President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law at 10:29 p.m. on December 3rd, 2024, bringing thousands of citizens to the National Assembly, demanding the lifting of the declaration. Lawmakers also gathered to pass a motion to cancel the martial law decree, though entrances were already blocked at around 11 p.m. More than 200 armed martial law troops began entering the National Assembly grounds by helicopter and soon clashed with aides and staff inside the building, leading to physical confrontations. Shortly after 1 a.m., all 190 lawmakers present out of the 300-member total voted in favor of the motion, which meant that the majority approval enabled them to cancel the martial law decree.
I hereby declare that the resolution calling for the lifting of martial law has passed.
Following the vote, martial law troops began withdrawing from the assembly, and a little after 2 a.m., all personnel had pulled out. Former President Yoon then approved the motion to lift martial law in a cabinet meeting and publicly announced the end shortly before 6 a.m. on December 4th. Now, during those 8 hours after martial law was declared until it was lifted, more than 10,000 people gathered, a powerful movement reviving South Koreans' resistance and fight for democracy.
Now, indeed, this does signify a moment when South Korea's democracy truly shone. Thank you for sharing your coverage with us.
It was my pleasure to be here, Doyeon.
After delivering his special statement, President Lee also held a press conference with international journalists. Topping the briefing were diplomatic affairs, and the president singled out the acquisition of a nuclear power submarine as a major outcome of the Seoul-Washington summit talks. Our top office correspondent Song Yu-jin has more.
South Korean President Lee Jae-myung says the most consequential outcome of his two summits with U.S. President Donald Trump was Washington's approval for Seoul to build nuclear-powered submarines.
동북아시아의 전략적 중요성, 또 우리 입장에서도 가질 수 있는 전략적 유연성, 자율성 이런 측면에서 보면 매우 유용한 결과였다고 생각됩니다.
Speaking to members of the foreign press on Wednesday, President Lee again dismissed concerns that pursuing such vessels could undermine the global nuclear non-proliferation regime. He emphasized that South Korea remains fully committed to non-proliferation and that going nuclear would contradict its goal of a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. Another area of focus was Seoul's approach to relations with its neighbors. When asked about the escalating tensions between China and Japan, President Lee said taking sides would only make things worse.
한쪽 편을 들기보다는 모두가 함께 공존할 수 있는 길이 무엇인지를 찾도록 하고 또 가능한 영역이 있다면 우리로서도 갈등을 최소화하고 중재 조정할 수 있는 부분이 있다면 그 부분의 역할을 하는 게 더 바람직하겠다 이렇게 생각합니다.
Lee mentioned that he is willing to visit both China and Japan soon to hold talks with President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi to further strengthen bilateral cooperation with each country. Looking at Russia, President Lee acknowledged diplomatic difficulties, citing the war in Ukraine and Moscow's deepening ties with North Korea. Still, he said Seoul will continue efforts to keep communication channels open to improve relations.
대한민국도 러시아에 대한 제재에 참여하고 있습니다. 사실은 상당히 갑갑한 상태가 돼 있죠. 북러 관계가 우리 입장에서 매우 바람직하지 않은 상태로 진전되고 있는 건 사실이죠. 그렇다고 해서 포기할 수는 없습니다.
Regarding North Korea, the president expressed his willingness to formally apologize to the North over newly surfaced allegations that the previous Yoon Suk-yeol administration sent leaflets to the North to heighten tension and thereby justify its martial law declaration, but added that he needed to be cautious as this could ignite ideological conflicts at home. As the year draws to a close, eyes are on how President Lee will navigate an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape in the new year and how he will continue advancing his pragmatic diplomacy centered on the national interest. Song Yu-jin, ArirangNews.
The National Assembly has approved a budget of $498 billion for 2026. Lawmakers passed the plan just minutes before the legal deadline on Tuesday, putting an end to weeks of tense negotiations. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
The National Assembly has approved next year's budget, totaling 727.9 trillion won, or about $498 billion. Lawmakers passed a plan just minutes before the legal deadline on Tuesday night, ending weeks of tense negotiations and delivering the first on-time budget in 5 years. The breakthrough came earlier in the day when the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party reached a last-minute compromise. Both sides agreed to maintain the government's proposed overall spending level, a key demand of the administration, and preserve several of President Lee Jae-myung's signature programs. Those programs include the nationwide local gift certificate initiative, which the opposition had previously argued should be scaled back. Under the final agreement, the parties decided to reduce $2.9 billion from a mix of artificial intelligence programs, policy funds, and several other categories. That money will not be cut from the budget entirely. Instead, the same amount will be reallocated to priority areas that both parties agreed require urgent support. Those areas include measures to strengthen the country's disaster recovery system following the massive fire at a state-operated data center earlier this year. The budget will also direct additional funding toward expanding the distributed power grid industry, which the government says will improve energy stability and technological competitiveness. National scholarships will also receive an increase to help families struggling with tuition costs during a period of slow economic recovery. In the end, both sides chose compromise over a continued stalemate. While keeping the overall spending level intact while adjusting internal allocations, the parties managed to meet the constitutional deadline for the first time since 2021. Lawmakers from both parties said the agreement was difficult but necessary to prevent funding disruptions for key public services. With the budget now approved, ministries will begin preparing detailed spending plans for 2026. The government says the new budget would prioritize economic support, national defense, and faster recovery from recent disasters while maintaining stability in state finances. Lee Seung-jae, ArirangNews.
South Korea's economy is gaining momentum again, with the Bank of Korea revising third quarter GDP growth up to 1.3%, the highest since late 2021, thanks to a rebound in domestic demand and net exports. Our correspondent Park Jun-an reports.
According to the Bank of Korea on Wednesday, South Korea recorded its strongest quarter-on-quarter GDP growth in 3 years and 9 months in the third quarter, expanding by 1.3%. This is the highest quarterly growth since the fourth quarter of 2021, when the country's GDP rose by 1.6%. The figure was revised up from the previous estimate of 1.2%, thanks to stronger than expected domestic demand and net exports.
The contribution of domestic demand to growth expanded significantly in the third quarter. Private consumption also made a much larger positive contribution, while government consumption remained at the same level as the previous quarter.
South Korea's growth rate came in at 1.2% in the first quarter of 2024, but fell sharply, contracting 0.2% for the second quarter. It then inched up to 0.1% in both the third and fourth quarters, before slipping back to minus 0.2% in the first quarter of 2025. The country's economy rebounded to 0.7% in the second quarter and continued its strong upward momentum into the third quarter. The Bank of Korea said that if the fourth quarter GDP stays above zero growth from the third quarter, achieving an annual growth rate of 1.1%, which is higher than the original 1% projection, is still plausible.
If fourth quarter growth comes in between minus 0.4% and minus 0.1%, the economy can still achieve 1% annual growth. And if growth stays at zero or above, an annual rate of 1.1% is also mathematically possible.
Despite the strong GDP growth, the income that actually flows into Korean households and businesses didn't rise as much. Real gross national income rose 0.8%, but nominal gross national income slipped 0.3%, as Korea earned less for its exports while paying for more imports, reducing the purchasing power of each export dollar. Park Jun-an, ArirangNews.
North Korea unveiled what appears to be a new long-range air-to-surface missile resembling the German-made Taurus, signaling a push to upgrade its air power. During an event marking the 80th anniversary of the North Air Force, leader Kim Jong-un said the service will play a key role in the regime's nuclear deterrence strategy. Byun Ye-young reports.
On Friday, North Korea publicly unveiled a new long-range air-to-surface missile for the first time in what appears to be part of a broader effort to modernize its air power. The weapon, visually similar to the German-made Taurus system operated by South Korea, was displayed at an event marking the North Korean Air Force's 80th anniversary. Analysts say the new missile, widely dubbed the North Korean Taurus, could significantly extend the strike range of North Korea's aging combat aircraft if its claimed performance is realized. Attending the ceremony with his daughter Chue, her first public appearance in nearly 3 months, Kim Jong-un declared that new strategic military assets and new important missions have been assigned to the Air Force. He stressed that the service would play a full part in exercising nuclear deterrence and must repel reconnaissance activities and possible military provocations by adversaries. North Korea has been accelerating efforts to upgrade its conventional air capabilities, revealing new unmanned aircraft and an airborne early warning platform earlier this year, and conducting mid-range air-to-air missile tests. Experts believe Pyongyang may be receiving direct or indirect support from Russia as military cooperation between the two deepens. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff cautioned that North Korea often unveils new systems before they are fully tested, and said further evaluations are required to determine their operational capability. Pyongyang, ArirangNews.
President Lee Jae-myung has proposed restoring communication channels with North Korea to end hostilities. Speaking at a launch ceremony for the Advisory Council on Peaceful Unification, the president noted that resuming dialogue with Pyongyang would be a starting point for a peaceful coexistence of the two Koreas. Inter-Korean dialogue has been stalled for 7 years. As Lee called reunification of the Korean Peninsula a must, he reiterated that he opposed any form of unification by absorption. That brings us to the end of weekly news highlights. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your weekend.